Okay, welcome to Time4Action's 11th webinar. Thank you all for being here. My name's Ken Johnson. My colleagues Kathleen O'Hara, Rolly Montpellier, and I are on the traditional territory, unceded territories of the Algonquin peoples in the Ottawa area. Today we have a couple great guests from the US. First ones, I think all of our guests have been Canadian so far, so we're branching out and we're really looking forward to hearing from them. Let's face it, Joe Biden is exposing Trudeau's greenwashing. And today we have a firsthand look at Biden's climate actions and the groups that are pushing him to act. Since becoming president, he's rejoined the Paris Agreement, canceled Keystone XL, appointed a domestic climate policy person and an international one. So it all looks great on the outside for sure. And he's directed federal agencies to purchase carbon-free electricity and zero-emission vehicles. And there's much more. In other words, he's doing what Canada should be doing, or at least that's what it looks like. Our guests are both on the US front lines and give us some real rare insights. The first is Harriet Shugarman. She's the Executive Director of ClimateMama, professor of Global Climate Change and Policy and World Sustainability at the Ramapo College in New Jersey, and chair of the Climate Reality Project, New York City Metro Chapter. She's nationally recognized influencer, trusted messenger on solutions to the Anthropocene. She blogs and lives in New York, and she's going to be on, what was that? She's been on some Morning Today or US Today or something of the sort. Sorry. Our other guest is Todd Fernandez. He's the founder and executive director of the Climate Crisis Policy Group. And he served as general counsel and legislative director for the Massachusetts Office of Economic Affairs, the governor's Brownfields Ombudsman, and has a master's of law in human rights and democracy from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. In 2018, he launched Climate Action Mondays, demanding congressional climate legislation with the Sunrise Movement, Food and Water Action, Climate Hawks votes, and 350 New York City, fostering the Green New Deal. He also led efforts for the Massachusetts Brownfields Revitalization Act, the LGBT Equality Act, and the Climate Emergency Standards, Extinction, he's also worked with Extinction Rebellion's New York Times Action and the New York City Chase Coalition. So the format for today is Kathleen will be a little different than usual. Kathleen's going to interview Harriet for a while, and then I'll interview Todd after he presents about a 10-minute piece about the work he's involved in. So please put your questions in the Q&A. Rolly will be asking the guests some of those at the end. And let's get at it. Over to you, Kathleen and Harriet.
You're on mute. Kathleen, you're on mute.
Hi, thanks, Harriet. Welcome to the viewers and welcome to our very special guests, Todd and Harriet. Harriet, I've just heard the name Extinction Rebellion, which I adore. One of their three demands is that politicians tell the truth. I don't think many Canadians think that Trudeau is telling us how serious it is or telling the truth completely. What about Biden? Do you think he really is doing what Extinction Rebellion would demand?
Well, I'm going to also add that for ClimateMama, our motto, which we've had since we founded in 2009, is tell the truth, actions speak louder than words, and don't be afraid. It's all three things that I think probably our parents taught us, we teach our children. And I am glad that Extinction Rebellion is also out there demanding the truth. And that's the first thing we should do. So but the truth is hard to follow through with, right? That's why we have actions speak louder than words. So I would say that Biden's put forward a big plan. And so far, he's only been in office 3 months, right? So he's following up and putting great people in place. He's doing, setting the stage. Will he move farther to policy and action? And then one other thing, I want everyone to know I'm also Canadian. I'm Canadian and American. I was born in Alberta and proud to carry both passports, Ken. So.
And you spend your summers in Edmonton or near Edmonton, I understand.
I do.
Well, Trudeau has been in power, as you know, you both know, everyone knows, for 5 years. So, and Biden has been in power for 3 months. Can you just tell us some of his first executive orders? Just in the first, I mean, he really did come out of the gate swinging.
Even before he came out of the gate, right? He told us he was going to have a climate czar. So I actually want to just pull up a slide and then we can talk to some of those points. So give me a minute here and we'll share that. Here's just some of the highlights. This was his second week in, actually, you know, he came in on the 21st and this was on the 27th. So his first day in office, right, he announced that we were going to rejoin the Paris Agreement. That actually came firmly into force legally in mid-February. He said he was canceling the Keystone XL pipeline, and he was centering our policy, foreign and domestic, around the importance of the climate crisis. He announced a leader summit. You know, you can read the list here in front. Federal, you know, the buying power of the federal government was going to support climate-friendly, green items and energy. He was putting a pause on all new oil and gas development. He was working towards eliminating fossil fuel subsidies and international lending. We can talk about that more as it relates to fossil fuel companies, rebuilding and green infrastructure. So, and he's followed through with setting structures up for many of these things since those that first 2 weeks of announcement. So, setting up conserving 30% of our land and ocean. So he's said, you know, he's going to walk the walk and he's setting the structure. So climate has been front and center in a way we've never seen actually with any administration. Let me stop sharing that. I'll come back to it after.
You've probably heard of Seth Klein. He's Naomi Klein's older brother, and he's just written a book called A Good War.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically says that we have to put the government on a war footing, mm-hmm. as we did in World War II. Do you think Biden is coming anywhere close to that? Because Trudeau certainly isn't.
Well, he's certainly putting it forward as if he's going to do that. There certainly are groups and individuals that would say he needs to go farther and faster. We have something, you know, an outline of what a Green New Deal looks like. The idea of it never was fleshed out completely. And where many groups are working on that. So his infrastructure proposal, you know, in the trillions of dollars that was just proposed a week or so ago, and his Build Back Better program is all, you know, putting climate front and center there. So again, as I guess the saying is, the proof is in the pudding. We haven't had the pudding yet. So, but he's definitely putting it out there. We, as activists, grassroots, and governments of all, you know, levels, need to then hold him accountable to what the federal government is going to do. But we need every other sector to follow through on that as well.
But AOC and Bill McKibben and the Sunrise Movement have all said what he's doing, even with the, what is it, $2.3 trillion mm-hmm. American Jobs Plan, mm-hmm. Isn't enough. Mm-hmm. AOC said it should be, I think, 10 billion. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking? And what is the general feeling down among climate activists?
Right. You know, we have are digging out of a hole, right, of the last 4 years where climate wasn't even on the agenda. It wasn't even on the website. Like what we saw last week or 2 weeks ago with the EPA had completely taken climate off of its website. So we have so far to go, right, from where we were backwards over the last 4 years. And even before that, with the Biden-Obama administration, you know, as far as energy, we had an energy all of the above policy. It wasn't, you know, climate forward all the time. So again, he's, you know, we are in an emergency. Yes, should we be in with both feet and running forward? From my perspective, clearly, but really they've been in power 3 months, this administration. We're dealing with a global pandemic, and climate still is on the front burner. We don't have time, but I believe that he's putting in place some great people, some great proposals, some great plans, and it's a really firm start.
Well, let's look at some of those people. Gina McCarthy, what do you think of her? She's the domestic climate czar, I guess.
She is. She was the head of the EPA under Biden and under Obama, excuse me. I'm going to actually pull up another slide for you that sort of lays out the all those positions in addition to Gina McCarthy. So, you talked about this all, across every department climate, and he's put those climate czars up there. So we actually have never had, this domestic office of policy. She has a good background. Again, the EPA was a mess before the Trump administration, and she was at the helm of that. So there, again, there's lots of, we could go for a lot of blame, but she's a smart lady. She is really gets it. She's a caring person, and she's a dynamic person too. And she's in a powerful position now. They had their second meeting only of the task force that is going to look at climate. She chairs that. There's the task force has as its representatives heads of all of the major departments in the US government. We've never had anything like that before. They had their second meeting in mid-March. Again, they're figuring it out and trying to come out of the gate running, and they're putting it into action, right? So I'm hopeful, but again, our federal government can only do so much. We need every facet of our economy and our society to, as you said, put us on a World War II footing. And so I think the places and the people are in place. She's a good person. He's put a lot of great people that were in the climate movement, that were out front and center in places of power. I'm sure, Todd and I, or speaking for myself, I know lots of people that are in, now leading positions in the government. So they were working in the space before. So, he's being advised by really smart people.
Well, speaking of another one of the smart people, Rolly just told me that when John Kerry, who was one of the builders of the Paris Agreement in 2015. When he signed the agreement, he had his grandchild on his knee. Yeah. Talk about a photo op. But I've also noticed that he's on the National Security Council. So this is pretty interesting that a climate czar, the international climate czar, is on the National Security czar, will be in the Situation Room. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because that's quite a breakthrough.
Yeah, well, even before, with the Obama Biden administration, the national security, various departments that were already looking at climate. Climate was seen as a threat multiplier. There was a report that has to go to Congress every 4 years. So again, he's bringing back, Biden, some of these things that are critical and key, but we're seeing immediately out of the gate too, with our armed forces, with climate also being put on that front burner as a threat and a threat multiplier, but also what can those agencies do in reducing, the footprint of the U.S. as it relates to climate too. So those are, you're pulling out all those great things that we're seeing. Then, that ClimateMama motto, actions speak louder than words. Then we have to see it. But in a very short time, he's put those key positions into place and emphasis on what's really important as well.
Well, let's look at the infrastructure bill in a bit of detail. I love this, that he's calling for 500,000 charging stations across the country by 2030. When I read about that and realize that just a couple of years ago, the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, dismantled charging stations, that's so much better. Do you know much more about transportation, what he's doing with transportation?
Yeah, again, let me pull up a slide that talks a little bit about that, but some of the highlights, right? So on transport, out of this $2.25 trillion allocated, 174 billion is being put towards this plan to win the EV market, right? There's going to be rebates, charging stations, electric school buses. He said, again, that all of our US Postal Service trucks are going to be electric, that he's going to work on building up our railroads. Environmental justice is a big front and center component of the climate plan. When we had the highways built in the US, they cut through many low-income communities of color. He hasn't outlined how he's going to do this. He's talked about building back those communities. There's a lot of detail that's still to come, but yeah, transportation and electrifying everything actually is part of the Biden plan, right? Moving towards it by 2035, electrifying our energy system is part of what he says he's going to do. So, you know, we have a long way to go to reach that. So that's got to start right away if we're going to get there. So
that's excellent. I hate to sound too negative about Trudeau, but his plan to retrofit homes, someone has pointed out that only 1 in 10 homes will be retrofitted by the end of the program he's got by 2028. Could you tell us what Biden's doing in that area?
Well, again, you know, to his mantra about the infrastructure bill and the climate plan, it's about, he talks and he uses these phrases all the time. So listen, you know, you can listen for them when you see a formal White House brief or statement, but he talks about good paying jobs, union jobs, and prioritizing environmental justice as part of, and so the Build Back Better, the part of the climate plan that has to do with retrofitting homes, retrofitting businesses, is about putting people to work to reduce, you know, the energy footprint of everything, and that, you know, brings in the employing people to do it.
I know, I love the fact that Biden said when he thinks of the climate crisis, he thinks jobs. Mm-hmm. I mean, if only Trudeau would say that, he could silence Jason Kenney from your province. Yeah. Not to blame you. Yeah. What about his $10 billion civilian climate corps? That's very much based on FDR and his New Deal. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's you know, again, it's exciting. The concept of it is exciting. There has been for a number of years a lot of proponents of setting up a civilian corps in the U.S. similar to the Peace Corps, and you know, we have versions of that are already operating. He's said that was one of his first announcements in that first week, that a Citizens Climate Corps was going to be set up. We haven't seen details of that yet, so how that will roll out, but I am sure we'll see it rolling into, you know, the jobs and the assistance with cities that are going to work on some of these, you know, rolling it in with the infrastructure plan. But again, so it's been put there, but the details are not forthcoming yet.
Okay. On to pipelines. Trudeau bought with our money a pipeline that we really don't want and is getting more expensive by the day. Biden, right, as we've said, canceled the Keystone XL, but there's still Line 3, Line 5, Dakota Access. Do you think he's going to be tough enough to deal with those issues?
You know, I would say that initially, we haven't seen that he is tough enough, because the Line 3 fight, which is really visible, the Dakota Access, they are not necessarily hard things for him to take that next step. And he hasn't done that. And he's been very silent on those particular ones. We have other pipelines, the Byhalia pipeline, which is an extension pipeline going through a low wealth community in Memphis, being railroaded. There's a lot of grassroots pressure around those. Those are just a few of them. There's through New Jersey, New York. We have so many pipelines coming in. So he has an opportunity to be firm. We have yet to see that. It was easy to say no Keystone, right? That's been a kick the can down the road project really in our country for more than 10 years. I was involved in the first sit-ins with that, 10 years ago, when 350 was calling for people to get arrested in front of the White House in August of 2011. And each administration has just used it as a hot potato. So that was expected. TransCanada, or whatever the owning company is now in Alberta, I mean, they knew that was coming. But these other ones, they were not, the environmental impact statements, there are mistakes made on them. He has levers he can pull to stop them, and he has yet to do that.
And he has said he won't ban fracking, which is so bad for methane leaks and things. Anything to say about that? Any hope there?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, again, the Obama administration had an all of the above energy policy. In fact, it oversaw the biggest advancement of oil and gas exploration in the United States. So he was part of that. The Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, her job was to sell gas overseas, right? But it's a different time. Biden, I think, it's really clear the impacts of fossil fuels across the country. I think that was very political in the United States because he had to win Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a fracking state, and he had to win that. And then we saw immediately, just actually a month ago, there's something called the Delaware River Basin Commission that controls it's run by the governors of Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, and a representative of the United States. We've been working for 10 years. It supplies drinking water for over 8 million people including in the New York metro area. 10 years to ban fracking in the watershed. It just passed. We just did that with those governors, but the representative of the federal government said, abstained on that vote. He could do that because it was going to pass anyways. So it's very political, when you look at it that way. He's had to say he was going to ban fracking from his advisors, whether he had to or not, that's questionable. But to win Pennsylvania, which was a swing, could have gone either way, that was key. And so he's sticking to that for now. But if we don't, he's doing a lot of other things. There's a lot of pressure. A lot of our fracking companies are failing. Gas prices are so low. There's a lot of, we're moving forward with renewables. Will the federal government support those companies in keeping them afloat? You can't do that and be a climate president, right? You can't buy pipelines and be a climate prime minister. So let's see what he does. Those are just words, as are the other things. But what does he do to support that industry or not? Let's see.
I know they just can't seem to cut oil and gas emissions. They just can't. That seems to be the line. They can do all sorts of green things, but the real problem is the oil and gas emissions, and they're afraid. One last question. More than 1,000 scientists and others have called on Biden to cut emissions by 50% by 2030. Do you think he's on the right track?
You know what? Well, we'll see in a few short weeks, right? That's one of the big, our NDC, our nationally determined contribution, our submission to the Glasgow COP, which everybody was supposed to have completed their NDCs for 2020. We haven't done, many countries have not yet. That's expected to be announced, and it's sort of like an over-under. Is he going to do 50? Is he not going to do 50? And he should do more, clearly, right? Our Paris Agreement that Obama put forward was something he knew he couldn't get through Congress, right? So it was low. We weren't very aspirational in our goals. So he could go a lot higher, Biden, and wouldn't be that hard for it to be achieved. So I think we can look to 50 and hopefully more.
Well, Todd isn't back with us right now, so I'll just ask one last question about the Leaders Summit on April 22nd. Biden's Climate Summit. Can you tell us a bit of what you know about that?
Yeah, it's sort of it harks back, right? Everything old is new again, in some ways. And it harks back actually to the Bush administration's major economy summit, when, it's sort of like who's not the cool kids, but the big players, and some of, in terms of his invites, Biden's invites, the small island developing states that are on the front lines of the climate crisis. But we had these major economy summit starting in the Bush administration, met over Obama's administration, sort of key players. And it's kind of this continuation of that to sort of set the stage. This is a meeting, moving into a very visible meeting, moving into the COP in the fall. So, we'll see our NDC come out during then, and then I don't think we're not going to see, it will be into the fall where we'll see more major changes, but it's asserting the US role at the table on climate and saying, we are back, we are here, and we are firmly at the table and taking a role. So it's a lot of, for the media and the cameras, but the emphasis is there to show the world, we're doing it on Earth Day. We're making a statement that we're back at the table.
Well, thank you very much, Harriet. And speaking of back at the table, Todd's back. So are you ready to do your presentation, Todd?
Yes. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for having me. And that was wonderful, Harriet. It's great.
Yes.
So hello, everyone. I'm Todd Fernandez with climatecrisispolicy.org. I originally come from the grassroots. I was in government for a while, and I went to Africa in 2008, as was said, and ended up working on gay rights in the United States and worked on the Equality Act to change the federal legislative strategy of that movement. And that bill has since passed the House twice, but it was a long fight to get the movement itself to support that strategic change. I was also involved in the immigration reform movement, where I saw the vast capacity of a nationwide coalition and state level coalitions. And then in 2018, I had started in 2015 telling the climate movement, you need to file your own legislation. And I was shocked at the absence of federal legislation and a national climate coalition. And I remain shocked at that. In 2018, the Off Fossil Fuels Act was filed, which was really a strong bill. And we organized around that and got the idea of federal legislation in motion. After that, we were like, well, what should be in a federal bill? And we worked to compile the digest, which is essentially our website. And it's 150 expert sources, bills, and laws, digested using Project Drawdown. And the point of that was to really zero in on the policy solutions under each sector, electricity and transportation, and all of them, so that we could see the commonality of what all these groups felt were the solutions. Because I found that they were fighting over hot button issues and disjointed. And so I hope that by bringing all the information in one place together, it would enable us to unite. Because the fact of the matter is that none of these individual issues and none of the individual groups have anywhere near the power needed to defeat big ag, big oil, and big pharma, which control Congress and all of our policy. So the aspiration and the strategic plan is to unite the thousands of organizations and millions of activists and common cause so that we can defeat this crisis. So in the last year, we've jumped into gear, and I'm going to share my screen a little bit and tell you where things have ended up. First, I'd like to share the carbon clock. I'd like to start with this so we know exactly what we're up against. This comes out of Berlin, but there are several of them. The 1.5 degree scenario over here shows 6 years, 8 months before we've put enough pollution in the air of our pollution right now that we lock in 1.5. And then as you click on 2 degrees, you can see 24 years from now, we will have surpassed the pollution levels that lock in 2 degrees. Between 1.5 and 2 degrees, there are a series of tipping points which would really bring calamity and irreversible damage, such as ocean currents stopping their current flow and the ice sheets melting, which again set in a series of domino effects. So we have 7 years, as I see the clock, to stop our pollution. So our project was working with all the coalitions to bring them together, and we've been networking ourselves into all these different tables of organizing circles because there's no central nationwide campaign working on federal legislation. And in doing so, we were looking for the commonalities among all the various proposals. And what finally, the light finally went off that, oh my goodness, it's the mandates, it's these standards. And so now we've zeroed in on this, the Earth Bill, a 2030 moonshot for Earth. The Earth Bill would mandate 100% by 2030, renewable electricity, electric vehicles, and regenerative farming. This is combined about 80% of the pollution solution, and it's 100% of the political solution, in the sense that the fossil fuel, big oil, and big pharma, which is involved in big ag, those 3 industries really control our Congress. So if we tackle them in this concise, focused bill that simplifies all the way too complex policy issues in this arena, I think we could break the back of their grip on Congress and then solve our pollution problem at the same time. So this is electricity, cars, and food. 3 items that are consumer-oriented items that everyone can relate to. It's our production, it's our pollution, and it can be our solution if we work together. As you can see here, these are the percentage of these areas. Once electricity goes 100% renewables, it could impact the industry number and of course the commercial residential number. So it's really 70, 80%. Then with agriculture, not only are you reducing the emissions, but by creating healthy soils, you're increasing their carbon sequestration. So the solution from just these 3 areas could be quite transformative. In terms of definitions, which is where a lot of this always breaks down in the discussions, renewable electricity is energy produced from wind, solar, geothermal, tidal wave, and existing hydropower is the way we're proposing the definition. So that's very specific so that it's explainable to the public. And then regenerative agriculture is longer, but it's again, very specific processes. And the idea is to make big ag, so the major entities that control the market share, any entity with over 10% market share in these arenas would be required to adopt these practices. And it would reach about 243 million acres of agricultural land in the United States. And then it's very specific. All this boils down to just using very natural processes, not disturbing the soil, and not using, most importantly, fertilizers and chemicals. The incentives enforcements are also very important. The idea is to tie this to the ability to take general business tax deductions. So any corporation, deducts its cost of office, staff, all of its, purchase and things like that. And so we could double the deductions or credits for these transition to renewable energy sources. And then more importantly, eliminate deductions for non-compliance. So if by 2030, they've not reached 100% in these arenas, we would reduce their ability to take their deductions by an equal amount. No business can really survive without these deductions, and it's better than credits, which can become cost of doing business. Again, the carbon clock, I just showed it, and that's why the 2030 deadline. If we could pass such a bill this year or this Congress in 21 or 22, that gives us about 8 years to actually accomplish the transition. Everyone knows that's an incredibly aggressive timeline, but that's what the science requires. This is, as I mentioned earlier, distilled from many coalition positions. So I won't go into them here because they're all US coalition efforts, but our movement is extremely disjointed. There's no one leading it collectively, and they're all doing their own policy proposals, and yet they're not doing legislation. Some of them are. And so you can just see from this that it really, these ideas of these goals are shared across many entities, including the House Climate Crisis Select Committee and certain legislation. The difference is these groups put these ideas as aspirational goals, and we're talking about putting them in law as mandates. I always ask the activists, what would you get arrested for? You know, a movement has to have legislative demands. You think of the Civil Rights Movement, the Equality Act, the Breathe Act, the DREAM Act. You have bills, and that is what creates the political outside pressure to accomplish a particular goal. If you don't have that ask on the table, you can't get arrested for something. I was arrested 3 times for the New York bill, and I didn't even like what was in it, but we got one passed because there was a bill. So this is a clear demand for activists. We're working with the youth groups, Fridays for the Future, Youth for Nature, Extinction Rebellion. They needed a demand. This will be that demand. The Earth Bill will be that demand. This is a unifying demand for the movement, as you saw across those coalitions. It's importantly a real greenhouse gas reduction law that is measurable against time. And time is what is not our friend here. That is the fight we're really in. And that's the difference between all these wonderful initiatives from the Biden administration and this proposal is that, you know, you don't know how many businesses are going to take advantage of tax credits, which are a huge part of this $1 trillion. You don't know how many businesses are going to, you know, take advantage of loans and grants and incentive programs. You just don't know how fast that will happen. So you need something that is a mandate in law that will then unleash the private sector potential to realize those goals. Everyone thinks that clean energy standards in the states, about 18 states have passed those, are critical because it sends a market signal to the renewable energy companies that there will be a procurement demand from the utility company to purchase the supply once they create it. And it will make their projects bankable, and it gives everybody a real timeline. It's a positive message, the pollution solution. And I think responsibility is really important. I talked to somebody yesterday and they're like, well, you can't make this seem everybody's fault and everybody's responsibility. But it is our production. These companies create things for us. We are the consumers. It is our consumption and it is our pollution. And then again, collective mission, which makes it exciting, a 2030 moonshot for Earth. We went to the moon in a decade, and we didn't have the technology then. And now look what we already have the technology, most of it, for this mission. We can change this together, and you can make it an exciting participatory thing. Electric customers can return their electric bills by saying we're going clean. All street lights can become car charging outlets. There are ways to make this an all-in together push. Strategically, none of these issues, as I mentioned earlier, has enough power alone. We have to unite across the sectors. We have shared opposition, big oil, big ag, big pharma. Politically, they control Congress. Mandates are their worst nightmare. This is what will call the question on the polluters and force them to change practices. And they're welcome to enter the clean revolution with everyone. No one says they have to stay attached to their old business models. Those models are killing our planet and destroying the future for humanity. This is not really a laughing matter anymore. We don't have time to waste. And this will ultimately enable us to retake our governments from the grip of power that these entities have, not just in the United States, but around the globe. We also have a ground game, adopt a district. I believe in the power of the grassroots. I think it's our only hope. We have 435 congressional districts in the United States. I imagine you're organized somehow similarly in Canada. We already have almost 100 districts adopted, and it's the local activist and the local group who really know, the people who helped that congressperson get elected. They know who does their hair and takes care of their children. So this is where your real power resides. And their job then, when somebody says, I'll adopt my district, and therefore they become a point person, finally, where we can direct all the other interests so they can start to coordinate and organize locally and build those local coalitions. We're working with a climate bill package of existing bills that cover all sorts of agriculture bills and plastics and fracking and stopping all the subsidies. All the component pieces are in various bills out there. We've put them into a package so that we can unite the activists who care about pesticides and all these individual issues and get them working together. And that's already happening. Meetings are happening all over the country. And more importantly, it's a strategy to get the activists ready to act. So that's our political power. We have a lot of organizations in our network. It's very loosely affiliated right now, but with the Earth Bill, we plan to get people to sign on the dotted line. It covers many groups, including many faith organizations. So that's my presentation on the Earth Bill, a 2030 moonshot for Earth. And I invite you to go to climatecrisispolicy.org and see the digest of all the solutions and just help spread the word. And hopefully you'll be interested in maybe coming up with your own Earth Bill in Canada. And I think that those three areas, if we can tackle 80% of our pollution by 2030, it'll be a miracle. And more importantly, it'll test our ability to actually make this transition and on a timeline. Because if we wait till 2040 or 2050, as everyone wants to keep putting these imaginary goals into the distance, we can't, then 2040 comes and we realize, oh, we're not on track. 2050 comes and we missed it. And those tipping points have already happened and it's game over. So we cannot put these ideas into the future. We need to act now. This is an emergency. Life on Earth as we know it is at stake. And so we're excited. We feel like we finally found not a magic bullet, but a very clear demand that activists and the masses can understand. And we have the marketing industry in the United States coming in now, and they're going to start to join to figure out how to send out get this into the public awareness. I think once you have a demand that people can believe in, you have a movement. And once you have a movement, you have hope. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to chat about it all.
Thanks, Todd. That's very inspiring. It looks like it has an awful lot of exactly what we're missing in Canada. Again, we have a number of, the Liberal government has put out a number of proposals, but most of them just simply, it's obvious from before we even start that they're far too little, too late, and too much continued coddling of the oil and gas industry, which is not helpful. I was wondering how, and I see you do have some buy-in. I was wondering how that's going with the larger groups. Are you managing to get the buy-in you're looking for?
Well, I keep watching movies like Conspiracy and Seaspiracy, and I've looked at this climate movement and all these organizations, and I'm really dumbfounded by the lack of legislative and coalition leadership that really calls these questions. So in the gay rights fight, the grassroots had to force our national organizations to embrace the idea of the Equality Act. They didn't want to, because in doing so, they pressure the Democrats to take a stance which could compromise them, they think, politically. So the industries of any movement are deeply connected to the establishments, unfortunately. And so we're going to have to push every major organization, I think, to be willing to go this far. We're working on that. That will happen from the grassroots up. So we have the 350 groups from 350.org. We have Sierra Club chapters. We have Climate Reality chapters. I'm hopeful that the major organizations, because this aligns with their goals, will support this idea. But I'm not confident that they're going to feel comfortable calling this question, because they don't want to, in any way undermine or jeopardize the Democrats' control of Congress in the next election. So we'll see how it goes. We just now zeroed in on this crystallized idea a few weeks ago, believe it or not. It's resonating incredibly well. And so I'm hopeful that it's going to go well, but we'll see in about a month or two, we'll know. what kind of support there is.
So I was going to ask you about that. How long, you said it's just brand new, this One Earth bill, in terms of the vision or getting it, pulling it together.
Yes, it's just and it's almost one of those moments. It's like, how come this wasn't obvious before? I wish I had thought of this 2 years ago. And, so it's really one of those torturous journeys, you know, with a million different ideas. And you finally realize that 3 big ideas could save a huge part of the problem and be explainable for a mass movement, which is really the trick. How do you simplify all this to something that everyone can understand? So that light bulb finally went off, and it's resonating uniformly with our network, which is already over 100 organizations across the country.
You mentioned, and it looks like a lot of your vision is based on your gay rights organizing. And I know of very few people have come out of gay rights and moved into the climate thing. So if you've gone along all your time in the climate, you're sort of inside the fishbowl and it's hard to see outside. I just wondered if you wanted to expand more on what were those key factors that you perceive made the gay rights movement have successes.
Well, first I'll say that as a gay rights activist, we were never welcomed into the world of politics. So since I was doing this 30, 40 years ago, we had to elect people who didn't hate us. Our strategy always had to involve electoral politics first, and donating and fundraising and getting people elected that didn't hate us to get the ball rolling. And it's been a long, arduous journey. The Democrats, I had to pressure President Obama to support marriage equality. And so Joe Biden came out in advance of Obama on that. We've always been the outsiders. So we've never trusted in government to save us. And that's the paradigm difference that I'm helping to bring to the climate movement. And that's why I told them when I first, 2015, and I went to the march in 2014, I asked them what's their demand, they didn't have one. And so I said, you need to start drafting your own legislation. I met with the NRDC and Sierra Club and others. File your own legislation, and that's the difference. We brought the paradigm that the movement has to lead, not to depend on legislators. And all you have to do is look at the history of this. Congress has known about this since the 70s and done nothing. So don't rely on your governments. Rely on yourselves and write your own legislation. That's the message from the gay rights movement.
Thank you. That's a very powerful answer. What are the major issues on trying to get people on the bigger groups to sign on to this? I mean, you've sort of talked about it, but where are you at with that? Are you having to alter things, or do you think you'll have to alter things, or it's just a matter of more discussion to compel people to buy into it?
Well, we're part of the U.S. Climate Action Network now, and that's got about 190 groups, and they're really focused. It's almost like the climate movement is a big think tank, as opposed to a movement. I'm even hesitant to use the word movement because movements have legislative demands and goals. And almost everything you see from any of these groups is more like a think tank policy reports. So that's the difference. And, you know, we're connected with Food and Water Watch, which is sort of the toe the road on the most, you know, serious positions to take. And then Environmental Defense Fund, which is, you know, working with the administration, putting forward ideas, but now sort of championing their infrastructure bill. So they're like part of it. And so we're networked throughout now these entities. And it really is going to depend on the desire of these organizations to build outside pressure. And what's clear now is that there is no outside pressure game plan at all. Everyone wants to go along and slide along with the administration, follow their lead, not confront the fossil fuel companies or pick any big fights. And part of that comes from what we've just been through when everything was the fight and it was just unbearable. And so I get it. This is a very savvy approach that doesn't really piss anyone off, but just funds a lot of things. And that would be wonderful if we weren't up against this deadline. So we're going to have to see with the organizations. And frankly, I'm not so concerned with the major organizations endorsing this idea. It would be nice, but when I go back to those movies, and you'll see that a lot of them are wrapped up in all sorts of funding issues. in the gay rights movement, our major donors and the major donors of the DNC are the same people. Andy Tobias is the head of the finance chair of the DNC. And this is true at all those levels. And institutional organizations and the people in them have careers, and those careers are based on relationships with staff in Congress. They see that their career is tied to their having constructive, positive relationships with Congress. And their institutions feel that they get this delusional concept of power by these access elements. But access is not real political power, as we can see from the absence of results. So I don't think the institutions that have been aware of this for 30 years, just like Congress, and haven't solved it and haven't saved us, are going to be our salvation now. They might flip and get on board, but I'm not worried about them, because when we did the Equality Act, we drove it from the bottom up, 250 local organizations. And I brought Occupy Wall Street to protest the Human Rights Campaign Fund dinner. Human Rights Campaign is our major organization. So we had to really push from the grassroots. And if you really want to save this planet, you're going to have to push your own environmental organizations on an idea like this.
This is so important for us in Canada, because I think we have exactly the same problem. We often talk about the major groups, and they even when the plans are totally inadequate, what they're suggesting, they're sort of going along, or not really much outrage, and we're just going to drift with the Liberal plans, which have just never worked. And they're stronger now, but in terms of the clock you put up, not even coming close. The last question I'd like to ask Todd is, if you could characterize what Biden is proposing and what Harriet was talking about Biden's work, contrast this with the major things you think would be different, or re-emphasize the major things that would be different with this One Earth bill and this approach. How far do you think Biden's plan will get us, and how far or not get us?
Well, so putting these mandates in law that by 2030, all these industries have to have switched their practices to non-polluting, non-toxic practices. That means the private sector will adjust and transition. And so you can't really replace with government money the power of the private sector. They're the ones creating the fossil fuel factories that provide the electricity, the utility companies. You make the utility companies buy 100% renewable, the procurement goes out saying we're going to be buying 100% renewable, and the private sector kicks in to build that. Nothing in Biden's plan is a plan to build 100% renewable energy nationwide. So there's a difference between providing funding to incentivize good actions and mandating that the entire industry switch gears by a date certain. So these are just worlds apart. There's nearly no way to compare it. You just cannot, if government wants to build and own the utility sector, if it wants to take over agriculture, if it wants to take over car manufacturing and do it right, that would be one thing, but we're not talking about that. So, all of these incentive programs are good. According to the US Climate Action Network, which has done an analysis of the amount of funding required for these kinds of implementations, we're way off from what Biden's proposing to where it needs to be. So even in terms of numbers, but all the Biden ideas are like how government would help support the transition. But without the mandates, you don't bring the private sector, and the private sector is the source of the problem.
Thank you. I think that's very clear. I think we'll go to Rolly. I see there's quite a few questions in the Q&A. Rolly, do you want to take over? Thanks, Todd. Appreciate your answers.
Yes, let me unmute. That was great. All the questioning was right on, and I loved your answers, Todd and Harriet. A few more questions. I'm about to combine a few because they were, overlapping. But one question from William, I'm reading on the side here, William Bradley and W. Quirian. Harriet, and I guess we can also ask that same question to Todd, but Harriet, what do you think are the major political, economic, and social obstacles to carbon reduction in the US, and how can these be overcome? You've got 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, put Todd in charge and everything will be solved.
What are the major obstacles?
Yeah, we have such a divided country, right? Our democracy is so fragile; it's about to break. So, for the federal government to actually, try to move things forward, to get Congress to pass laws, as Todd was talking about, right? To have that mandate, it's such a fine line to walk, because you got to get everybody, you have to get a majority on board. So in the US right now, right, we are moving in the Senate to breaking up something that's been there forever, something called the filibuster rule, where we would just need a majority vote so that Biden could move his legislation through. We saw with Obama, he was, very deferential, wanting to bring all sides together. We are in an emergency. I think, we just have to move forward and let some of those procedures fall by the wayside to just pass on, move some of these things and make them into law, as Todd was talking about. So, politically, that's huge. Economically, many of our businesses have headquarters overseas. They pay their taxes overseas. Our country is broke. We can't expect the government to be able to do all these things. As Todd said, we need everyone to come forward and recognize this. Way beyond my 30 seconds, and it's an excellent question, but I think we need another panel discussion and session to answer those three, that particular question.
Great answer. Todd, someone mentioned here that it's wonderful the way you've united the climate movement. There are so many small groups duplicating efforts. So it's not really a question, but I thought that comment was quite appropriate to both of you, actually, but it was addressed to you. So along the same lines, do you see any obstacles that perhaps Harriet has not mentioned? I think she talked about the political obstacles, but what about public support? Like how is that shaping up, and can it transcend the political arena?
Well, I think the real challenge is for us to unite among the activists and the more like-minded folks first, and that's it's scattered like the wind. I've never seen anything like it, and boy, you can slice every one of these issues into a million different things, and it's like no answer seems to be perfect. And so the real challenge humanity is facing right now is whether we can unite to save ourselves against about 100 corporations that are destroying our planet. And uniting humanity is no easy goal. And egos, they're fundamental things about, we've become so individualistic. Our egos are everywhere, our careers and our self-interest. And humanity thrived because, hundreds of thousands of years ago, because of its ability to work together collectively to save itself from danger. And since then, we've become so disaggregated and that we can't collectively work together well, I don't think. And so this is the challenge, and it's really at the activist level. If we can stop quibbling over definitions, if we can stop quibbling over brands and status and ego, these are fundamental problems. But again, there is a big climate movement of people and groups. And so I wouldn't worry about the public just yet. Align yourselves at the grassroots level. Get these groups together. Make a list. It all starts with a list in our organization. We have so many spreadsheets, it'll blow your mind. Get a spreadsheet, crowdsource it, get at least a grassroots group in every town or whatever, however you're organized, and start talking together. That's the first step. And see if you can agree on your own Earth bill. The language we have, I think, is going to be transferable around the globe. And we're already talking to folks in England, and so that's where I would start, with the activists, and not worry about the masses so much. We'll worry about them once we get united.
Oh, great answer, Todd. Thank you for that. Oh, go ahead, Harriet.
Yeah, really, I was just going to say, and there's that whole thing: a small group of people can change the world. And here, and I imagine it's similar in Canada. I was so surprised talking to some congressional representative, a congressman here in the New York City area, and they said if they get 10 calls a day. only 10 into their office. They are talking to the congressperson. If those calls come in, if they get more than that, they're actually spending time, discussing it around the table. So it doesn't take, a huge group of people to make these ideas come forward and come up. Our movement, I would, differ a little bit with Todd in that it's not very big, but it could be powerful, way more powerful than it is, because, we can put that pressure onto those elected representatives. And I'm sure that, you can do that with members of parliament there as well.
Yeah, your answers reminded me of a book I just finished reading by Thomas Homer Dixon. He's a Canadian author affiliated with the University of Waterloo. And he wrote a book about exactly that, like some of the challenges are cultural, the diversity of humanity, global divisiveness and so on. So he talks about building on hope and the hope factor, and he deals a lot with the cultural challenges and the obstacles because of the diversity that we have around the world. We have time for one more question. This one touches on the nuclear industry. Here in Canada, this is from Dorothy Golden, and she writes, here in Canada, the Liberal government is promoting small modular nuclear reactors as a solution to the climate crisis. What do you think about this foolish proposal? I guess she doesn't like it. The money is already pouring out to some provinces. So where is Biden's stance? I haven't seen a whole lot about the nuclear industry and the climate dialogue going on right now in the States. So either one of you, Todd, go first, and then Harriet.
Well, all right. Before I answer that, I just wanted to say about the masses. This Earth bill is about cheaper renewable energy. It'll be cheaper for everyone, much cheaper. Electric vehicles have 18 moving parts instead of 2,000, so you'll have much fewer repairs. You'll have no gas charges, and I'm told unlimited mileage for these vehicles over their lives. And then the food piece, the agriculture piece, it just has so many co-benefits. Eliminating cancer related to pesticides, and letting dead zones in the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico, protecting our water supplies. So there are many ways to sell, electricity, cars, and food, being a salvation on many fronts. And I think it'll be cheaper, healthier, and everyone will be better off. With respect to nuclear, this is one of those hot button issues.
It is.
Movement, which divides everyone, and they're busy fighting over nuclear. And what I say to the anti-nuclear people is, let's focus on what the plan is to build 100% renewables. And that's what our team is working on. And that's why we're talking about a 100% renewable standard that excludes nuclear. I think the prevailing thinking is that we put existing hydro, because a lot of people have issues with hydro, a part of it which in New York comes from Canada. So we grandfathered sort of in existing hydro, and I think existing nuclear is still sort of a given because it's there. And the idea is not to build any new and then to draw that down. With respect to the new technologies, those themselves have some controversy around them. Hydrogen seems to be a little bit more promising, but these are all much more expensive. They're untested, they're unproven, and we already know that solar, wind, and geothermal work, and they're cheaper. So it's just, it's a way to avoid calling the question on the fossil fuels, really, I think. And so I don't think we should allow ourselves to be distracted. We should think, what is the plan to build 100% renewables?
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just, I see a lot of infighting in the movement over, picking at each other. In New York, at the end of this month, the Indian Point power plant, nuclear power plant, is shutting down all 3 of its reactors. They've been going in stages, and we've seen some gas plants come on to take that. There's a lot of discussion that we didn't need any additional energy, and the lights are still on in New York as New York City has come down. But there's a lot of controversy among one another in that. And as Todd said, Kathleen, as Todd said, the advances, the price reductions on renewables that are proven, those are just advancing, really exponentially. So, those are ones that we can move forward with. A big part of the U.S. Carbon-free energy in the U.S. comes from old nuclear plants. So we're not going to replace them with new nuclear, but that there's definitely a big discussion again to have around that. But why not move forward with renewable, with battery storage, with energy efficiency? We have them, we know they work. We don't have to worry about waste products, etc. But again, it's for a bigger discussion, I think.
Yeah, well, that's exactly our sentiment here around the table. I'm used to having, sitting around a table for meetings, but that certainly is the consensus in our group as well, that, why are we even looking at nuclear? It's just a way to deflect attention from perhaps what we ought to be doing more aggressively. Todd, were you going to?
I was just going to say that from building a movement from the grassroots, you start with the dream and the vision that you want. And you build, so your bill should just include clean energy as defined by you without, nuclear and all these things. And then let the politicians, once, decide if they want to try to put all these other pieces in the puzzle. So we don't have to make that decision among ourselves. Decide on what clean is for you, fight for that. And then let the chips fall where they may on the other things.
Thank you for that. Ken, it's 2:09, and I want to thank viewers for their questions. We haven't been able to cover all of them, but thank you for the questions nevertheless. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about Harriet's book. Now, I was told to hold this very steadily because, so I see this in reverse, but this is the title of her book. And I put a link to her author page, and also I'll put it in again, but also to, I guess it's the newsociety.ca books where you can buy the books. I have 3 copies of it. She sent me one, and I had already bought, and I knew it was coming, so I bought 2 other copies to give to my adult children and their families. So mine has the added advantage of being personally autographed. I know you can't see that, but I kind of look at it every day. Not really, but I have read the book. It's a great book, and it's obviously about how to talk to your young children and not so young children about climate, which is a very, very serious issue, and how to turn their anxiety, I guess, their angst into action. So the book is up for a few awards, and Harriet was telling us that she will be on Good Morning America, I believe, to talk about the book. And I wish her well, and I know the book is doing well. So you need to get at least 1 copy of this. As I said, I have 3, but that's me. So yes, and there are more messages here, but so I think I've covered the promotion of the book. Thank you, Harriet, for doing this. It's a great book.
Thank you.
Rolly, I have 6 copies of the book, and I've printed out Todd's One Earth Bill 30 times.
Okay.
Don't think you're going to outdo us just by having 3 copies, man.
Well, Harriet's going to send me a whole carload of that stuff.
I will do so.
After that pitch, absolutely.
I want to tell you there's 19 copies of it in the Calgary library system. How is that in Alberta? That's pretty awesome. I don't know how that happened, but somebody
did in Alberta. Awesome.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, if any first of all, bravo, Harriet, and I'm waiting for my copy. And to any activists out there, if you want to work on an Earth Bill for Canada, contact me, climatecrisispolicy@gmail.com. Let's join forces.
Thank you for that, Todd. I think that's a great invite. Yeah.
Speaking of action, Ken, do you have our list of Trudeau, Freeman? We always try to get people, as you were saying, Todd, call people, call your representative or your MP in our case. So, yeah, do you have the one of the MPs, Ken?
I don't have it in front of me right now, sorry.
Oh.
But we'll send it out.
Well, these are the letters to the editor addresses. So people could write to their editors of the local paper And I think I've said this before, that if you want to write to an MP, all you have to do is put their first name, period, last name, at parliament.gc, Government of Canada.gc.ca. And as we've been saying, the public has to be heard, and otherwise they won't be worried about it. So Ken, speaking of slides, do you have the slide for next week?
I do.
All right, so I'm sure most Canadians and our listeners have heard about the recent Supreme Court ruling that the federal carbon tax is constitutional. Well, there are several important lawsuits against the federal and provincial governments going on. So next week, we'll have the eco-justice lawyer, Danielle Gallant, who is helping young people sue the Ontario Ford government over climate inaction. We'll also have one of the young people, Alex Neufeld. We don't have her picture on quite yet. She's sending it to us. But she's one of the young people who's suing Ford. I'd like to sue him over many subjects, but anyway. They'll be joined by the former Environment Commissioner of Ontario, Diane Sachs. She was fired by the Ford government when he got rid of that key position. It had been going for 25 years. Ford came in, got rid of the charging stations, got rid of Diane Sachs, who was very effective. Anyway, Sachs is a longtime environmental lawyer herself. So it should be a great discussion, and we hope you can all join us. And before I turn it back over to Ken and Rolly, thank you both, Harriet and Todd. It was fabulous. Okay, Ken.
Thanks, Kathleen. I just wanted to put up just two slides from Todd's website. This is the overall website. I'd highly recommend going there, particularly for this, which is the Climate Crisis Policy Digest. And this list on the screen here is just the start of the 150 different policy initiatives that they've managed to collect, and it's an incredible resource. Yeah, with that, I'd like to stop sharing the screen and thank both of our guests for a really inspiring session. It's always great to see it's just such a transformation in the US, thank God. I just can't even imagine where we'd be at if it hadn't happened.
Wow.
But now that it has happened, it's just great news. I think it's really going to push the Liberals or the Canadian government to do better, because they're fiddling with us. It's not real. And this One Earth bill, I think, is a great inspiration for what we need in Canada too. We're on even a much smaller scale than you are in the US, just because of population. We just have a much smaller number of groups, but just as much to accomplish. So I think it's been an inspiring session for me, and I hope for our viewers. I thank all our viewers for coming in, and hopefully we'll be pushing our groups in Canada to start acting stronger soon too. That's part of the vision of the Time for Action, is to put progressive visionary folks in front of people, see what they think, and to hopefully help people move their vision to a more progressive and radical place that it needs to be, given the seriousness of our current climate emergency. So again, I'd just like to thank both of you again. Harriet, thank you. I hope we did enough pitching of your book. And Todd, thank you very much for all your inspiration. I think it's great work you're both doing. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, and thanks for everyone who has attended. Bye for now.
Thank you all so much.
And we'll be putting this out on YouTube. Once we get it cleaned up a bit, we'll be putting it out on YouTube so other people can watch. Okay, thanks again, and have a great day, the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you all.